Dan Tehan is the Liberal MP for Wannon in Western Victoria. Good morning.
Morning, Chris. How are you?
Very well. Now, if we start overseas, the climate talks in Lima, Peru, the government is engaged in the talks. It's stumped up $200 million for the Green Climate Fund, and yet this meeting seems to be struggling to come to some sort of consensus. Is this sort of time and money well spent, you think, engaging in this process?
Oh, it is, and it's very important that we get it right. Obviously, we need to take action against climate change and global warming, but we have to do it in a way where every country participates. This is an issue where you need an international agreement to deal with it. I think Julie Bishop and Andrew Robb are doing a terrific job from the reports that I've read. They're in there ensuring that Australia's interests are at the forefront of this debate. And if we are to get agreements, and if they're formally binding agreements, that Australia will be able to meet those, but that also that other countries will have realistic targets which they will be forced to meet. And if other countries won't sign up to binding agreements, then making sure that the targets are set, are meaningful, and that there is something to really drive for to get a result in Paris next year.
How important is it that any agreements reached in Paris are legally binding, which is what the Australian government is pushing for, and not just voluntary targets?
Well, I think it is important, but ultimately in the end, the most important thing is we get international agreement to act. And so therefore, if there are other countries for one reason or another that can't, so for instance, I think one of the major sticking points for the US is, even though they might want to look at legally binding targets, the fact is that they're worried that their Congress would never agree to them. So we have to be realistic of what can be achieved, and if major countries, and especially major emitters, can't sign up to legally binding targets, then I think we have to find another way to make sure that there is international cooperation on this issue. It is no good that each country sort of taking its own unilateral action. This is a problem where if you're going to get a real result, we need global action on it. And this is what this process is all about. Obviously, it stalled after Copenhagen a few years back. We need to get it back on track, and I think that's what Julie Bishop and Andrew Robb are looking to do.
OK, now from what I read, there's some sort of push to revisit the way the targets for Australia are calculated, the original Kyoto targets. That was seen by some environmental groups as giving too many concessions to Australia because so much of stopping clearing trees was involved. What do you think about going back, revisiting targets?
Yeah, look, I think the environmental groups using the Pacific Island nations to drive this is counterproductive. I think they should be focusing on getting a real and meaningful outcome out of the negotiations next year rather than trying to revisit this issue. Australia very successfully got land clearing as part of its commitment. That is what we've been working towards, is having that included in reaching our targets. Now, these environmental groups trying to redraw the map at this stage, I think, is completely counterproductive, and they should be focusing their energies on making sure that we can get a real result out of this meeting, and more so a real result out of Paris next year.
Now, in Canberra today, State and Territory Education Ministers are meeting with Christopher Pyne, trying to push the national curriculum ahead. Are you happy with the way that process is working? Because there seems to be some sort of blowback there from the states and territories.
Well, look, I hope there can be agreement. As a father of children who are at primary and secondary school, this is an important issue. We need to make sure that our kids are getting the education that they need, not only to ensure that they can work successfully here in Australia, but ultimately now we live in a globalised world, so we need to be providing them with an education which gives them the resources to be able to work and compete with students globally. And that's what the Australian government is seeking to do. I hope that we can get a very good outcome on this issue, because it is very important. And the more toing and froing, the more debate, the more uncertainty in this area. Ultimately, it's our children's educations are the ones that suffer as a result of it. And it shouldn't be an issue which becomes a political football.
Are you concerned then that instead of being negotiated in good faith with the best outcomes achieved, that politics are intervening too much into the process?
Well, I think there is always a worry about that. But if we focus on the core principles, then we should be right. What is in the best interest of our children's education? What are the skills that they need to make sure that they can be successful in the future, not only here in Australia but globally? That's the key to it. So we have to make sure that they've got the basic skills, those writing skills, those English skills, those mathematical skills. We obviously have to make sure that we'll be producing the scientists, the mathematicians, as well as all the other things that we will need going forward. And we have to make sure also that our curriculum is true to our history. And so if we can do that, then I think we will be fine. So my hope is that the politics will be put aside and everyone who is at the table will think, OK, what's in the best interest of children who are at school at this stage, and what are the skills that we need them to have to make sure that we can continue to compete and succeed in a globalised world.
Dan Tehan, just finally, let's look ahead to the year ahead. This year's been a fairly ordinary one for the government if we go by opinion polls, and I think you probably concede that yourself. Looking forward to the year ahead, how does the government get back on track, if you like?
Yeah, I don't think it has been an ordinary year for the government. I think it's been a very good one if you look at the achievements. Obviously, there's been some issues around how we've solved those achievements, and I think the Prime Minister has admitted that. But going forward, to me, there are sort of three key things which will define the agenda next year. We have the intergenerational report, which once again will show the impact of what an ageing population is doing on the nation's finances and how we have to prepare for that. It's funny, I was reading something a couple of days ago which shows where Japan currently is at and the challenges that it must now meet as a result of its ageing population. To put it in stark contrast, Chris, there are more nappies sold now for older Japanese than there are for younger Japanese. And we have to realise this. We have to understand the impact that an ageing population has on especially our medical expenditures, and we as a nation are going to have to prepare for that. We also have the taxation white paper, which will enable us to do this, to make sure that we've got our tax base correct, to make sure that we are taxing those parts of the economy as efficiently and as effectively as possible, and also the Federation White Paper to make sure that our interchange between the federal government and the state governments is working, is efficient, is effective, and that we aren't duplicating resources. We have to be doing more with the same resources that we've got. That is going to be the key driver for the government going forward and for the nation. So I think those three issues will very much define the year next year.
You've just nominated three very serious and important issues and policy areas. Yet, from my perspective, it seems like every day I've been coming to work last few months and we've been concentrating on what the Senate crossbenchers are doing. It seems like a real problem for this government. I guess it would be for any government. Can you see that process getting any better, or is it the fact that not just the news cycle, but I guess government policy initiatives are held hostage by these group of Senate crossbenchers?
It is a problem, and I mean, I would appeal to the crossbenchers in the Senate for them over the Christmas period to really stop and reflect where the nation's at. I think we're going to see in the budget figures which come out in my EFO the true state of the nation's finances, and we have to think about what is in the best interest of the nation going forward. What's in the best interest of our children and our grandchildren? Can we continue to steal off our children and our grandchildren so that we enjoy the standard of living that we do, and yet knowing full well that they won't? I think that that's not acceptable, and I think it's time that we really did focus on the important issues and the issues which will define our nation over the next decade. And my hope is that the crossbenchers will realise that and understand that the government is trying to act in the best interests of the nation. And those three issues will define the agenda next year. And I hope that the crossbenchers will give it the seriousness that it deserves, because otherwise, as a nation, the warning bells are there. We will see our standard of living decline if we don't act now and act in a way which, once again, sets our nation on the path of sustainable prosperity.
Okay, Dan Tehan, thanks for your time this morning.
Chris, absolute pleasure.